Last time we talked about how to define the world we want. But in order to get there, we have to understand the world that we have. And we need to understand it in two really important and key ways. One, why would anyone want to live in this other world? Why is it attractive? Why does it have energy? Why does it pull us towards it? And then two, given that it's an attractive world, given that people want to live there, given that it's a thing that they want, why aren't we already living there? There must be something pushing back. So we refer to those as promoting pressures, things that make a behavior more likely when you strengthen them, and inhibiting pressures, things that make a behavior less likely when you strengthen them. This is really a key and important flip to how you understand changing behavior, because in reality, we can't change behavior directly. I can't pop open your brain and find the button that says, do this behavior, and then hit it, and then you do it. Instead, I change pressures then change behavior. One of the things that helps me understand the importance of pressures is to think of them in very physical, literal ways. So I often imagine something like a balloon, right? I think about this balloon of behavior, and I want that balloon to rise. I want the behavior to happen more often. But I can't actually touch the balloon. I can't reach out, grab it, and move it up. What I can do is influence. So maybe I could put a fan underneath it that pushes it farther up. I can also remove inhibiting pressures, right? So if I could magically weaken gravity, that would make it drift up more. If I could change the pressure in the room, the air pressure in the room, I could make it drift up more. I can change the conditions in which the balloon exists, the conditions in which the balloon lives and breathes and is in the world to change where it goes, up and down. We cannot change humans directly. We don't reach out and manipulate them directly. Instead, what we change is the environment in the world, and that's what results in behavior change. It's important to note that pressures aren't the motivation and limitation that we just defined in our behavioral statement. Motivations and limitations are binary. They're that 0-1 thing that must be true, that core desire or structural thing that must be true in order for us to do that thing in the first place, to want to do it and to be able to do it. That's different than pressures. Pressures vary. They vary between people at different times. A good example is, the perception of cost as an inhibiting pressure. People will sometimes say, isn't that a limitation? If I don't have money, I can't do the thing. And that's true at some level, but we can always get money. We can borrow it. We can stop paying our rent and do something else with it. Money's very fungible. So that perception of cost changes at different times. If you're very hungry, right, then that can overwhelm the perception that something is expensive. When you compare two things to each other, a lot of the social psychology tricks that people use to manipulate people into changing behavior is by changing our perception of price. How expensive is an experience? When we compare it to something very small, it might seem very expensive. If a ticket is $100, when we compare it to something like a $10 cheeseburger, man, that sort of feels like a lot. But when you say, hey, this is a priceless gift, you'll never be able to get this experience again, it's a one-time thing, suddenly it doesn't seem so expensive. That's a manipulation of the pressure that is our perception of cost, the inhibiting pressure that is our perception of cost. That's different than the limitation of, if they only accept credit cards for this ticket and I don't have an electronic form of payment, I literally physically cannot buy it. It's that 0-1 binary thing that I can or cannot do. So there's a difference between pressures and limitations. Limitations don't change between people. Motivations don't change between people. They're not different at different times, right? Whereas promoting pressures and inhibiting pressures, they change across context. Cost also helps us appreciate another thing about pressures, which is they don't always scale linearly, right? The difference between free and 1 penny is very different than between 1 penny and 2 pennies, right? There are very few things in the world that I'm willing to pay a penny for that I'm not willing to pay 2 pennies for. But there are lots of things in the world that I will take for free, but wouldn't even be willing to pay 1 penny for. I think a lot about conference t-shirts. I have a closet full of conference t-shirts. I use them to work out in and paint in. They're not very high value to me, but I always end up with a lot of them. Why? Because they're free. As a matter of fact, it would take energy to get rid of them. They come in the bag and I'd have to take it out and figure out what to do with it and leave in the hotel room. And then the hotel will call me and tell me I'd left something. I just don't want to deal with all the rigmarole of getting rid of this t-shirt, right? There's strong inhibiting pressure to do that. Would I pay even a penny for that conference t-shirt? Absolutely not. I have way too many of them already. I don't need more. But because they're free, the inhibiting pressure is dramatically lowered. And we have to remember, pressures aren't some perfect linear line that as I make costs more expensive, people's behavior goes down at exactly the same rate. They modify. There may be places where there are cliffs, right? There may be places where there are whole parts of economics and behavioral economics that try to map where all of these things are. You can get really lost in that, and massive scale and really well-developed products, maybe you want to go map all of those things related to cost. Typically earlier in the process, or things that aren't fully at billion-person scale, you want to get it vaguely right. And that's an important thing to recognize about all of these pressures is we can have an understanding of them. You can always dig deeper. You can always peel more layers, keep going down the stack of whys. You can go to 5 whys, 10 whys, 20 whys. There's a magic ratio in the middle, and you'll get a sense for this as you become more experienced as a behavioral scientist. Just when you've got enough depth, hey, I really understand this pressure. I understand what's going on here across a number of people. I don't have to do more than that, right? This is not academic science. We're not trying to perfectly prove and map absolutely everything about how something works for people. We're trying to be right enough. We're trying to understand well enough to be able to change behavior in the context that we're in. And so I want you to focus on that sort of right enough feeling, and you'll get that over time. And we'll talk a little later on about some of the ways that you can build that in structurally. Another important thing to remember about pressures is that they can be changed. They may be emotions or cognitions or give rise to emotions or cognitions, but they are not immutable. They're not some personality characteristic that you're born with and you can't change. Those personality characteristics may interact with pressures. They may make us interpret pressures in a particular way, but they aren't themselves pressures. I'll give you the example of lazy. I hate this word lazy because often that's our misunderstanding of the situation, the set of pressures within which a person behaves. So a good example is it's easy to look at people who live in a food desert and say they're lazy for not eating fresh fruits or vegetables. But when you look at their environment and you recognize actually, fresh fruits and vegetables are quite hard to get. The inhibiting pressures are very high. It may not be that they're not motivated. It may be that they totally understand the importance of fresh fruits and vegetables. They may just not be active or accessible to them in that moment. So you want to be careful as you're starting to investigate and understand the world that you don't end up in this land of personality characteristics, right? This is about external things that you and I can change that interact with an individual that then change behavior. Another thing that helps me think about pressures in the right way is to remember that behavior change is probabilistic, not deterministic. What do I mean by that? Well, it's not true that when I do A, people do B. That's a deterministic world. There's a one-to-one relationship or correlation between things, right? Everything is causal. Instead, we live in a probabilistic world. When I do A, people are more likely to do B. Over a large number of trials, maybe it's a behavior they do often, or a large number of people are, in general, it is more likely to happen. That helps me remember that pressure is this sort of it is a rich soup of understandings of the world, and often incomplete. I could never map all of the pressures related to a behavior. I can't understand all of the promoting pressures and all of the inhibiting pressures. That's impossible. Instead, what I can do is start to understand enough of them, more of them, that allow me to intervene in ways that probabilistically increase behavior.